Do you people here think we should put Australia first? If you do, let's hear it. Australia first! Don't forget Graeme Campbell.
Immigration is an idea whose time has passed.
Well, good morning. Today is the 29th of July, 2025. I'm Frank Kemp-Salter, and I'm here interviewing Graeme Campbell. Why isn't it the Honourable Graeme Campbell, by the way?
I guess I'm not very honourable.
Well, you were there a long time. You were in Parliament a long time.
Yeah, if I'd been a senator, I'd be honourable, but that's the way it is.
Well, in my mind, you're honourable, okay?
Jolly good.
Today I'm interviewing Graeme, who was a member of the House of Representatives from 1980 until 1998 and did a lot of momentous things for us. And just to put this interview in context, I want to announce, Graeme, that the British Australian community is awarding you the Alan James BAC Advocacy Award, which includes life membership in the British Australian community. And I just wanted to say, I've already discussed that with you. It's our honour to bestow this on you. The award is granted every few years to individuals, and they're pretty rare individuals. They have been over the last couple of generations who've stood up for Anglo-Celtic traditional Australia and defended us against those intent on changing the national identity. Anglo-Celtic Australia has had few champions in the 1980s and 1990s, so it is seemly that we recognise those such as you who took a stand for us. So please accept this award. We'll be sending it across to you. You're on the other side of the continent. Graeme is talking from Kalgoorlie in Western Australia, about 2 hours away. Australia's a large place, so you definitely deserve an award and much more, Graeme.
Well, I'm very honoured.
Right. Well, thank you for that. Now, today I just want to go over some biographical details, mainly your parliamentary career, of course, but we want to understand our listeners will want to understand what it is about your background that made you see through the propaganda and take an independent stand on immigration and multiculturalism. So, with your permission, will you tell us a bit about your deep background? We'll spend 5 to 10 minutes on that. I think when you were born, where you were born, what part of Britain, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah. Well, I was born in Oxfordshire, but my family moved to Portsmouth, which is right on the south coast. My father knew that he was about to be, well, he was called up, he was about to be sent overseas, and he wanted us to be safe. And he said, Portsmouth will be a lot safer than Oxford. As it turned out, it was the third most heavily bombed city in the UK.
You're amazing.
But we left for Australia when I was, I think, 12 or 13.
Which year was that?
1950 or 51.
51. You were born 39, right? 1939. Yeah. Right. So yeah, I've seen Portsmouth. It's a beautiful, magnificent harbour.
Yes, a very good harbour. That's why it's there, of course.
Yes, but all the ships lined up for the German bombers, and you were born just in time for the war.
My mother said I caused it.
Well, given your subsequent career, that's possible. So when you were a young teenager, you left for Australia with your parents.
Yes, yeah.
Where did you settle?
One thing I've never got my head around is My parents were very liberal in a sense. They let me go away on my bicycle for a weekend. So I'd go and tour the New Forest or ride to Winchester or Southampton. A lot of parents wouldn't allow that today, but yes.
Of course, Britain was a different place, but back then it
Oh, it
was
was,
relatively
yes.
safe, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Times have changed. By the way, that's a stone's throw. Portsmouth is a stone's throw from Battle. You know, where William the Conqueror
Yeah,
landed.
Hastings, yes.
Hastings. You're not too far from Hastings, right?
That's right. Just a bit further around the east coast.
Yeah. So a very historic part of Britain. And then your parents took you out to Australia
Yep.
as a teenager. And where did they settle?
Oh, they went to a place called Tailem Bend first up, which is about 70 miles east of Adelaide, main railway line on the main road to the east. And I went to school in Murray Bridge, which is 15 miles away. I can convert that to the new distances, but I feel more comfortable with miles, not
Tell me again.
kilometres.
Tell me again how many miles that was.
It was about 72 miles east of Adelaide.
Right. And school was what, 9 miles?
Murray Bridge was 15 miles away.
15 miles. That's
Yeah, used to
26.
go to school on the train, but I used to come home. I found out that school closed on just about. You could pick which car you wanted to stop, and I used to hitchhike home every night. Would save an hour.
Right.
And all the time I went there, I think I only missed out twice. Once it got dark, it was a lot harder to get cars to stop.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you were an independent lad.
Oh, I guess so, yeah.
And now I've got a question about Campbell, the name Campbell. That's Scottish.
Yeah.
So did you have Scottish ancestry, obviously?
Oh, obviously, yeah. My my father's father left Scotland, went to Dorset. He was the engineer. He found more lucrative employment in Dorset, which is right next to Hampshire.
Right.
He then moved to Portsmouth. But it's the Campbells have got a very famous history in Scottish history. They are loved and hated in about equal measure. They became the most powerful clan in Scotland because they concentrated on the law and on military matters. And a lot of the rest of Scotland felt that the law was either beneath them or above them.
Right. Yeah, I think the Scottish admixture can convey some rebel attitudes, because the Scots were, until the settlement of around 1700, there was always some warfare taking place or building up between Scotland and England.
Yes, well, in the last 2,000 years of Campbell history, they started off very opposed to British expansion, but by the time of settlement, they were very pro, and that is still the case.
Well, they've gained tremendously. The Scots have gained tremendously from riding on the English, one would say, riding on the English coattails, except that often they were in the vanguard. The Scots were in the vanguard, for example, in the military.
Yeah.
And as administrators in the growing empire. And so the Scots had a tremendous stake in the rise of the British Empire.
Oh, they do, yeah. And it looks to me like you might have a Scottish tie on.
I wore it for you.
Oh.
It's not my clan is Stuart, by the way, sort of reddish.
Yeah.
I have this tie. Is this a Campbell?
Yeah, it looks like an Argyle Campbell to me.
My grandma will call me a traitor, but I don't mind. That's all right.
Well, the McDonalds have had their revenge. My brother married one.
Yeah. McDonald's always a bit radical. Now let's move on. So you grew up in South Australia,
yes,
and then moved across to Western Australia.
Yeah, I went to an agricultural college, Nullarbor Agricultural College in Adelaide, and my brother, my young brother and I, in England, we used to fantasise about owning a sheep station in Australia.
Mhm.
We were going to go to Australia and acquire a sheep station. As it turned out, we acquired a sheep and cattle station. But he opened up the Nullarbor Plain, which was probably the last great pastoral development Australia will ever see. And he was sent out to open that up, and it was the biggest sheep station in the world, a place called Rullina.
Mhm.
And we actually opened that up from nothing. There was nothing there, and except the railway line, which was absolutely invaluable. And it was funny because it was like growing up in a time warp. I mean, all the vehicles were wartime, 1940s vehicles. And when we first went to Rullina, the biggest industry was rabbit trapping. The rabbit trappers used to, that was a funny culture. They used to trap these rabbits, and they used to order their out from Kalgoorlie. There was a brewery in Kalgoorlie in those days, and they used to get out these large bottles of Hannon's beer, it was called. And you can imagine that they came out in the train in a closed van, and they'd be very much at room temperature. It was often very high, and they'd sit on a flat and they'd drink this almost boiling beer around a circle. And it was fascinating to watch them open a can of beer, and the beer would go everywhere, and they tried to swallow it all. But that the Caligzi virus wiped out the rabbits, so that put pay to them.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was a good thing because we had the myxomatosis go through earlier and had an initial big success, but didn't last that long. The rabbits returned, but when Caligzi got rid of the rabbits, birds immediately started to reappear on the Nullarbor we hadn't seen or we'd never seen.
That's amazing. Yeah.
And the reason was that the rabbits used to eat the grass down before it went to seed. And it was interesting to see how nature worked. The rabbits, when the rabbits were there were hordes of foxes and cats. And
That's right. Oh, yes. The food chain. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you were on this vast property, and what was it? Mainly cattle?
It was mainly sheep.
Mainly sheep.
Yeah, but we were the last to maintain sheep on the Nullarbor because we ran into a big dog problem. We were inundated with wild dogs. A lot of them were escaping from Aboriginal communities, but they were so thick you could shoot a dozen a night, and that made it sheep pretty unviable. People who opened up this country, they netting fenced their entire property to keep out dogs, and it was largely successful for many, many years. And they still maintain that netting fence today. They just renewed the netting.
And during this period of, you were a pioneer. Let's face it, you were a pioneer. One of the last frontiers in Australia, the Nullarbor area.
Yeah.
What were relationships like with the local Aboriginal population?
The local Aboriginal population was very disorganised. There were a couple of coherent communities. We had no trouble with the Aboriginals. We didn't have a lot to do with them, but we had no trouble.
Were they working on some of the properties, droving or whatever?
Very few. Why work on a sheep property when you could work for the railways?
Yeah. So it was amicable relations with the local, as they say, First Nations population.
Yeah, not a term I use, actually, because they never were a nation, of course. They were always a collection of warring tribes.
Yeah.
I know that's politically incorrect, but historically, that's the fact.
Well, when white settlement began in the late 18th century, there were around 500 linguistic groups, and the largest organisation of Aboriginal clans was at the language level. There were 500 variants.
Yeah, that's right.
500 languages. Each one could arguably be called a nation, although on a very small scale, maybe 500 people for a whole linguistic group, 500, very small populations. So I take your point that there's doubt about whether it's appropriate to call them nations, but I'm happy to do that if that's what they prefer. It's not too far from the truth. But you would have with Mabo in the 1990s, you would have more to say about the Aboriginal issue. But we'll come to that further down the track, if I may.
Yeah, sure.
So you were then. When did you find your way to Kalgoorlie?
Well, I had a job when I left school working for a company that had a big pet shop in Kalgoorlie, in Adelaide. But their main business was the export of Australian fauna. And I had a job catching Australian fauna, which was mainly kangaroos or ostriches. People don't realise that ostriches were wild in Australia. They were just turned out when the ostrich feathers became unfashionable.
Or do you mean emus?
No, I mean ostriches.
Ostriches.
Ostriches was the centre of the big ostrich farming industry in Australia.
Mm-hmm.
When that became uneconomic, they simply turned the ostriches loose. Actually, having caught both, I can tell you, it's a significantly bigger bird than the emu, heavier. And in fact, the wear and tear in catching ostriches is so high that what the company did was to mark out the ostrich eggs and catch them a week before they were due to hatch and take them to Adelaide and put them in an incubator.
Brilliant.
And snakes was another big export. And I must say I never had a better job, but it was very good money. I used to get the award wages plus £5 a head for everything I caught. And
not bad.
I could catch, 20 kangaroos in a night. And snakes was, in the southeast of South Australia, there's a lot of snakes around. It was not much trouble to catch snakes.
Just for those listening, just a side comment. These, what you've named, are not and were not endangered species. Australia is crawling with emus, especially in the regional and outback areas. Different species of emus, many of them. In fact, they're feral proportions.
There's more kangaroos in Australia now than there was when Captain Cook landed. And the reason for that, of course, is that we provided water for them. When I first went to Nullarbor, you never saw a red kangaroo except in very good seasons. And the grey kangaroo population was much more localised. But now there's red kangaroos and grey kangaroos all over the Nullarbor because we provided water.
Yeah, makes sense. So in 1980, when you entered Parliament as a Labor MP, you were 41, am I correct?
Yeah, 41, yeah.
41. What led you to take up politics?
Oh, I've always been interested in politics, and my father had been very involved in the Labor Party in Britain, so I just gravitated towards the Labor Party. Although my father said to me, before I joined the Labor Party, son, he said, the Labor Party's finished, it's changed, it's not the same. And I thought, oh, Dad, you're just old and bitter. So I joined the Labor Party. I found out that he was absolutely right.
Well, the Labor Party changed dramatically, say, between that during the 60s. I'm thinking of the transition from Arthur Corbell across to Whitlam, Gough Whitlam. The changeover occurred in sort of 67, something like that, and around that time. And Whitlam was a very different kettle of fish to the old Labor types, wasn't he?
Oh, absolutely. And of course, Keating, for whom I have very little regard, Keating, I heard him on the radio the other day, still espousing his view that we're part of Asia. And I think Keating did enormous damage to this country.
Yeah. We'll come to Keating, have a little section on Keating later in the interview. We'll just continue this framework if we may. And so Migrate Australia convention. You began fairly conventionally in politics. I've had a look at your main speeches during this period, and can I read out some issues, and then maybe you could just give a quick comment about it. Mining. You were a great supporter of the mining industry. Is that right?
Yeah, I was, and I am.
It's brought us untold wealth. Were there any issues back then that you felt you had to fight to defend the industry?
There was a general, section to the Labor Party was a view that this was a milk cow that we should just exploit. And of course, the Greens, who were starting to come into prominence at that time, and they certainly infested the Labor Party. And in fact, they have now effectively taken it over.
So mining was getting a raw deal sometimes from Labor.
Yeah.
Another issue you took up was one thing I read, that you actually crossed the floor to vote against the Labor Party to do with gold mining. Is that right?
Was on the gold tax. Now, I knew that the gold tax wouldn't make any difference to the mining industry once it was established, but the gold industry had been in real depression and was just starting to come good, and I knew it needed a few more years, or I felt it needed a few more years before the government should even think about taxing it. But as it turned out, I and, in fact, an estate member called Julian Grill fought very hard against the gold tax for the same reason. He was a good friend of mine, and he played an important part because he kept Brian Burke in check, who was then the state premier. But we managed to hold off for 8 years the introduction of the gold tax, and when it came in, they allowed all development in the gold mining industry could be written off against taxation in those 8 years.
Yeah.
See, prior to the gold tax, gold mining didn't have that. We couldn't write off expenditure. But, and I must say, in that regard, Hawke was much more reasonable than Keating. Keating was just absolutely black and white. Called me several bad names for trying to protect the industry. Mm-hmm. Hawke was much more reasonable. But then, in my view, Hawke was a much better human being than Keating was.
Right. Yeah, character can come out.
Mm.
Can we move on to national defence? Now, this was for you a mainstay of your time in Parliament. You really stood up for a stronger defence.
Well, I did, and I still believe today that we have to maintain and strengthen the ties with Great Britain, and I see the government's just signed a 50-year defence treaty with them. But people remember when John Howard invaded Timor, it was a fairly brave step if you compare the size of the Australian army with that of the Indonesian army. Britain offered help immediately. America never did, but Britain twisted their arm to get access to a lot of their sort of semi-secret stuff. And that was a clear evidence that America, it was weighing up. Is it in our interest to support Australia, or should we support Indonesia because it's much bigger? That never occurred to the British, and the same situation will arise today. The America will always put, and I don't blame them for this, they'll always put America's perceived best options first.
Now, with the British, as you know, after the fall of Singapore in 1941, there was a loss of faith in Australia towards the British because they had failed to defend Australia against the Japanese. A mitigating circumstance was Nazi Germany, which was bombing Britain at that time, and Britain was in a big war against Germany. So it's understandable their forces were divided and they couldn't hold Singapore.
Well, I think Singapore deserves a history in itself because it was, in my view, due to bad management that Singapore was lost. And in fact, Keating did enormous damage to the Labor Party support amongst British migrants who had been a very large body of support for the Labor Party. The reason that, of course, was most of the migrants came from north of the London-Bristol line, and they tended to be Labor voters. But when Keating said that Singapore was lost by cowardly British servicemen, which was just absolute nonsense,
ridiculous,
he did enormous damage to that relationship.
Yeah.
And the Labor Party never, ever fully recovered that support base.
Keating's Anglophobia was petty. It was sort of pathetic. Do you remember on one occasion he mocked the sound of a leading Liberal member of Parliament, mocked his English accent. He imitated his English accent, and he had to withdraw. He had to apologise and withdraw. But it was an appalling example of straightforward, bigoted Anglophobia.
Absolutely. And his Anglophobia was always present, and it's still there. And I think it goes back to his Irish roots. I think Well, I just think Keating was a blot on the history of the Labor Party.
Yeah, I think this age-old dispute and resentment between the Irish Catholics towards the English. Okay, the English did occupy them for some centuries, so they had reason for complaint. Now, we understand that, but I think that it's hurt both parties, and certainly in Australia, where we all these ethnicities just began fusing together to form a British population.
Yes.
It's been tragic for us because it's been a source of unnecessary division. And it's not necessary. Arthur Corbell, for example, was a proud Irish Catholic, son of Ireland. He was an Irish nationalist, and he had no problems in perceiving Australia as a great place for people of Irish ancestry. He had no problem with that. He's
That's right.
far more tolerant. Okay. Agriculture, innovation. I saw this heading. You gave a speech on innovation in agriculture, and I was fascinated. Which innovations did you have in mind?
Well, when I was a member, I had this American come into the office one day in Kalgoorlie, and he said he was in Australia to have a look at our agriculture because his father had told him all these great innovations in agriculture had all come from Australia, and he was here to get in on the ground floor. But he said, I'm fine myself, very disappointed. All you've got is last year's American equipment.
Ah.
But I mean, we introduced arid land agriculture. The stump jump plough was just one example. It was an Australian invention. But there were others, big harrows, and the general use of low rainfall agriculture. Of course, there's a lot of America, though not quite as stark as Australia, still had that problem, or still has that problem. Anyway, I thought it was an eye-opener for me. It was just about the time that we had bought out the last independent tractor manufacturer in Australia.
Uh-huh.
And we had designed and made a tractor that was very, very popular with farmers, but was bought out and became just another peg in the Alice Chalmers list.
Another subsidiary. When
Yeah.
I was in high school, I was taught that Australia invented all these things. For example, frozen transport of meat from Australia to England. Why? Because it was refrigerated. So that was an Australian innovation. Another one was, I was taught, I can't hardly believe this, that the harvester, the big grain harvesters, was an Australian idea. Could that be possible?
It was. There was no doubt it was an Australian invention.
Really?
Yeah, and this American guy clearly believed all that because he'd come out to Australia to be right at the cusp of new developments. But he found
Right.
out that we'd simply become receptive of American technology.
Of course, the scale of their capital markets is vast compared to ours, so they can buy out Australian companies.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Now, Australia did some dryland agriculture in Israel. For some reason, I have it in my head. There was a period where Australian consultants were flown across to Israel to advise them on how to make use of, because a lot of dry land in Israel.
Yes, yeah, mostly dry land. Yes, it's but not just Israel, the whole of the Middle East.
Uh-huh.
There was Australian consultants there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now I might get onto something a little bit more controversial. Multiculturalism became one of your bugbears, and you began criticizing it. And I've got multiculturalism in conjunction with immigration restriction, because the two, in fact, went together.
They did, yes.
As multiculturalism grew as an official ideology, this is just my opinion, it was used to justify indiscriminate immigration, mass immigration from Africa or initially from Asia. And the argument was, well, diversity is our greatest strength, so where's the problem? Any comments from you?
You see, multiculturalism was never ever discussed in the Parliament. It was imposed on Australia, basically by Fraser and Whitlam together, was never ever discussed in the Parliament. And had it been discussed in the Parliament, it initially would have been rejected. And I don't know how the vote would go now, because we've been absolutely saturated with this cult of multiculturalism. But, you don't have to go very far out of the cities to find out there's not much multiculturalism there or here. And what it's done, it's given us, Australia has to have a united front. We won't survive, or we can't survive if we divide against ourselves. And multiculturalism has simply done that. Had it been limited, if the immigration numbers had been kept at a lower rate, we could have assimilated them into our culture, but they were simply imposed upon our culture. And what's that's given us? It's given us an Islamic faction and a Chinese faction and a growing Indian faction.
True.
And that's certainly not good for Australia's unity or for our defence.
Yes, we're about 5% ethnic Chinese, maybe coming up to 6% Hindu, Indian, and Sikh, and then there's the Muslim component as well. And I think we're suffering now the consequences of the Labor Party, initially the Labor Party, seeing a source of votes, of block voting from these communities for them.
That they still do. They still do see that, and I think it's it's actually reprehensible and short-sighted.
It is short-sighted, I think. I think it is. Now, I'm interested in how you entered Parliament in 1980, various issues, mining, agriculture, national defence, began occupying your time. But from 85, you were saying in another conversation, from about 1985, you began addressing multiculturalism and immigration. How was that received in the Parliament?
It made me anathema in the Labor Party, although I had good support from some members of the Labor Party. Not the entire Labor Party wasn't united around this. There were big divisions, but of course it was steamrolled by Keating. I put the growth of multiculturalism down very much to Keating.
Were you openly criticised? I mean, did people have a go at you, or were they just snickering behind your back?
A lot of snickering behind my back, although I was berated in Parliament by both Hawke and Keating. That didn't worry me. I think it really played into my hands. But then when you believe you're right, it gives you a sort of strength, whether you're right or not, but gives you a sort of strength.
It's a tremendous boost, isn't it, knowing that you're right?
Yeah.
Listen, I want your opinion on this. My impression is that when the Whitlam, the sort of university-educated leaders took over and began imposing leftist, centre-left, social democratic ideology on the Labor Party, which had been a traditional white Australia party until the late 60s, that they sort of suppressed the old view. They didn't just eradicate it, but they suppressed the old white Australia view among Labor guys. Now, I actually had a discussion on television as a student with Senator Tony Mulvihill. Did you know Mulvihill at all?
Oh, yeah, I knew him, but it was him at the time going in.
Yeah, well, this was 1979. I was a student, and I was objecting to mass Asian immigration already back then. And so I found myself debating this senator who was really an old Labor type, smart, good instincts, spoke well. I was completely tongue-tied and everything. And at the end of the session, he said, "Do you need a lift back to Sydney?" This was in a television station in North Sydney.
Yeah.
And I said, "Yeah, sure." So he said, "I've got a car out waiting outside." So we jumped in his limo. And we were driving back to Sydney, and he said, "Listen, a little advice, son." He said, "What you're saying is absolutely right, but you shouldn't be so militant about it. Just tone it down a bit." So that, to me, was an example of a lot of people in the Labor Party were the old Labor types, but they just felt they couldn't speak up.
Yeah, well, there was no doubt that atmosphere was there. It was right through the Labor Party, and they were certainly constrained by the presence of support for multiculturalism in the very senior ranks.
Yeah, and in the media, by the way.
Oh, yes. Well,
the media was pushing already. Now, the Sydney Morning Herald went through a period of being divided. Got the older editors in having traditional ideas, but the young journalists being produced by the universities were already more on the left. And of course, there was the Murdoch media, already from 64 on, 1964 on, you had the Australian newspaper. You always took an open door policy towards immigration, Murdoch.
Yeah, I think that's changed a bit. I actually now think the Australian is the only paper worth buying. I think that they've simply abandoned a lot of their fervently held ideas.
Well, there's more diversity in the Australian than in the pages of The Age or the Sydney Morning Herald.
Yeah.
Certainly more diversity of views. So we're from 85 on, you're under a bit of pressure, which you're resisting, but people are criticising you for your views. You also came up, I noticed this, you made a speech about Palestine, the mistreatment of Palestinians.
Yeah.
But that was already an issue in the mid-80s, was it?
That's right. And I don't resile from that. I think Israel's record in Gaza has been appalling. I mean, they talk a lot about the final solution. Well, they've been trying to impose the final solution on Gaza for a long time.
Now, what's interesting is that view is shared by the Labor left. The Labor left for a long time was critical.
Yes,
Of course, the Labor left was critical of all nations, nationhood in general, not just Israel, but at least they were consistent. So here you were putting a point of view that was actually shared on the left of the Labor Party, which is sort of a socialist left faction, right?
That's right.
Bit ironic.
Yeah, ironic and useful.
Yeah. You had different motives. It was just a matter of humanitarianism with you.
Yes.
You weren't doctrinaire opposed to nationhood.
No.
Now, there's one final issue I just wanted to, I've jotted down here, which is the Aboriginal grievance industry. You, for example, you became a critic of the Mabo decision by the High Court in the 1990s.
Yes.
Would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, it was in the 90s, or I saw it developing in the late 80s. I think the High Court had no experience of what it was like in Aboriginal communities. And I'm still very adamant that the amount of money that's going to Aboriginal communities, I know it's not being directed to where it's needed. And their mantra is, we need more money. No, more money won't solve the situation because it'll just cement the grievances. I think the Aboriginal solution is actually very easily handled. All you need is a fair go, and that's all that's needed. And I think what we've done, we've allowed this industry to grow up, this grievance industry, which there's no satisfying them. The more you give, the more they want.
Mm.
Now, I think the last referendum, which was, I think, one of the most important referendums that I'm aware of, showed that Australia is of the view that there's got to be reined in. There was a massive vote, and in fact, the only place in Australia where it had any credency was the ACT.
Yes, which says a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think the Labor Party is going to has a problem because it is starkly visible what the Australian public think of this situation, and that makes it very difficult Labor Party policy.
Yeah. I think it's absolutely true what you say, that the more appeasement is used on this in a sort of an apologetic manner, the more is demanded. And now the annual expenditure on Aboriginal assistance is comparable to the expenditure on defence. It's a bit less these days, but it's in the same order of magnitude as defence.
That's right.
Extraordinary.
Well, that's something Australia has got to come to grips with, because if it doesn't, it's going to be very destructive.
Mm. I just noticed that the Mabo decision, actually, when you read the fine print, when it's not that unreasonable. For example, they ruled that Indigenous Australians should have access to land, to country, for ritual religious reasons, which seems reasonable. Now, the demand's being made for freehold title. It's being made for far more intrusive control,
yes,
than just access for ritual purposes. So it's a live issue. Now, what was the Campbell plan? Was the Campbell plan? I'm intrigued by this. I don't know what it's about. Is it related to the Indigenous grievance industry?
No, I don't think so. No.
What's the Campbell plan? What was the Campbell plan? Maybe it's a journalistic phrase that you're not familiar with.
I must say I'm at a bit of a loss.
Right. Okay. I just came across this heading. I thought you might recall what it was. It was probably a common sense solution for the Aboriginal grievance industry. But we can move on. There's no need to dwell on that. Now, I've got a question here. I've gone through some of these issues that you were active in. It's a wide range of issues, and I think you had an impact. My recollection is that you were taken notice of, at least within the party, within the parliament. Why did this happen? What was the path to becoming an immigration patriot and opposing multiculturalism? What led you towards that by the mid-'80s?
Well, I guess it was just simply pragmatism. I could see the danger that was arising from multiculturalism, and it's still touted and put on the Australian public as a solution to all our problems. Well, it's not. It's the cause of a lot of them. But I'm amazed. I mean, when I was involved in defence in the submarine issue, for instance. Now, I really, really put a lot of effort into the submarine issue because I knew that the Collins class was a very silly purchase. And I had the Chief of Defence, whose name I can't recall, phoned me up and said he wanted to buy me lunch. And I said, well, look, pretty hectic in the Parliament right now. Why don't you come to Parliament and I'll buy you lunch? So he did. And he said to me, well, as it turned out, you're absolutely right, but we want to know how you knew all this.
Ah.
And I said, common sense. And he said to me, well, this was important because he was quoting from a speech I'd made at some time. It was an article I'd written for a paper called the Pacific Defence Reporter, and I talked about the limitations of the military mind. And he said, oh, this is an example of the limitations of the military mind. I said, yeah, absolutely. But it was rather interesting to have the Chief of the Armed Services saying to me, as it turned out, you're absolutely right.
Pretty good.
But
the recommendation
was too late because, I proved that there was corruption in the tendering system, and it was a very simple thing, actually. When politicians interview all these various tenderers, the Navy supplied us all with questions because they say, well, politicians wouldn't know what sort of questions to ask. And I never ever read their papers because I knew points I wanted to make. I was sitting at my desk and I saw the German response. Because you've got to remember the Germans were the preferred supplier of the submarines, wasn't the Swedes. And on my desk there, answer to some questions you might like to ask. And there in black and white were these questions laid out. And that was the order in which they were asked by members of the committee. Yeah, I went to see Beazley about this, who I might say was the worst Minister of Defence we've ever had. Certainly, in my knowledge, there might have been some earlier, but certainly in recent times, he's the worst Minister of Defence we've ever had. I went to see Beazley, and they say that they talk about people going white. Beazley did. He actually blanched, and his colour drained from his face. Then he said, oh, no, it's just coincidence. I said, it's just not coincidence. So I went to the Ombudsman, and the Ombudsman upheld my view. It was clearly collusion in the tendering, and that led to several members of the Navy being sacked. And I said to Beazley, look, just wax indignant. You say this clearly not good enough. So just put on hold for 2 years. It won't make any difference to you. In 2 years, you can do the groundwork and you'll probably get the submarines quicker than you would otherwise. But no, they gave it to the Swedes. The Swedes were always a straw man. And as it's turned out, their submarine, it became semi-serviceable because Australia did a lot of work to make it quieter. That was all done in Adelaide, Defence Department resources in Adelaide. But it was, the Americans who were used as consultants by Australia because they don't have diesel submarine industry, and they described the Collins class as an underwater rock band. Now, so we did quieten it down a lot, but that was the American decision. Now, I remember I was talking to the submarine guy on one of the big American aircraft carriers, which the Americans flew me out the aircraft carrier. It was a political thing to show how the goodwill of the American Navy. It flew me out there and flew me back. So it was an experience to land on an aircraft carrier and to take off.
Absolutely.
But he said to me, "We can't understand you." He said, "The British are the best in the world at submarines." Then he said, rather wistfully, "They're probably better than we are." And I think that's absolutely true. And that leads us today, the AUKUS program. I think if America fails to deliver, we will do just as well joint venturing with the British on a submarine. And I think the British submarine industry, which is in a mess, could be geared up much easier than the American. And also, I think you'd have no trouble getting far greater Australian participation than with the Americans.
What's your opinion about going nuclear, having nuclear subs?
Well, I think it's very, very common sense and very, very important. I think the nuclear deterrent is very important. And on the horizon, if China turns out to be militant, which I think it is, or it's already showing signs of that, a nuclear deterrent is the only thing that's going to slow them down.
But with I think we have 3 ships on order, 3 submarines on order. At any given time, there'll be 2 in the water. So it seems so small to me. If
we're lucky, we had 5 Collins class, and sometimes we did have 1 in the water. So but I think 2 in the water is still enough to give a deterrent.
Yeah, and they have they're unlimited range, so they have tremendous advantages.
Yeah.
And with modern missile weaponry, they can do a lot of damage to an invasion fleet.
Yes, I think the Chinese would be very wary of having a nuclear explosion in the middle of Shanghai.
Yeah, although we won't have nuclear weapons. That's not the goal.
I think we have got to acquire nuclear weapons, and if we can't get them from America, I think we can get them from Britain.
Strategic or tactical nukes, you think?
Tactical, but they're tactical is enough for what we need there. Submarines are mobile. You can put them close to China or close to anywhere, for that matter. To an extent, they're an unknown quantity, so they're never going to be quite sure what we've got.
Yeah. Do you think do you approve of Australia's joining the AUKUS alliance against China to contain China? Or do you think it's reckless in any way, or do you think it's appropriate?
I think it's appropriate. It's appropriate and it's inevitable. One of the things I know, I have a fairly large concentration of Asian in my electorate, and I was amazed at the anti-Chinese sentiment. There wasn't a lot of the Asian community. And I had Filipinos say, "Oh, we've seen what China did to our country." That was a fairly common response from migrants.
There is some ill feeling, isn't there, among these source countries?
Oh, so absolutely.
Vietnam, Philippines, with regard to China, they're all being bullied by China in the South China Sea.
Yeah.
Indonesia as well.
Yes. China's record is not very good in relation to Southeast Asian nations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, this is a fascinating topic, but we have to move on because I'm trying to sketch your overall career. Now, the Labor Party disendorsed you and kicked you out of the party. When was that?
In 1979.
I think it was a bit later than that, wasn't it?
No, it was in 1980 I stood for.
You entered the parliament in 1980.
Yeah.
And you had your big bust-up with Keating in 1996, so it was a couple of years before.
Right. Got to make allowances of my encroaching senility.
Tell me about it. You're not alone. So during the 1990s, you caused some more headaches, and you were highly critical of Keating. I think was that around the time you were asked a question about his potential contribution to the Labor Party or Australia, and you said the greatest contribution he could make would be, what was it?
A state funeral.
A state funeral.
Well, that was actually as a result of the West Australian state election, where I believe that Keating, his contribution, caused the state Labor Party to lose office.
Ah, right. Right. So there was a reason for that.
Yeah.
But clearly that was jocular. You weren't seriously suggesting that he'd be given a state funeral. But now you had
I would have welcomed a state funeral.
Oh, okay. Now, in 1996, you had an electoral victory because they disendorsed you, they kicked you out of the party, and they went for you in the lower house. And independent senators can have a chance to win, but lower house, it's much tougher.
Yeah.
And you won. You actually won the 1996 election.
Yes, and I felt fairly confident I was going to, mind you.
Mm-hmm.
And if it hadn't been for Pauline Hanson, I'd have won the next election too. But I had an interesting experience. I had this member of the Jewish community phone me up and said he wanted to help me build bridges to the Jewish community. And I said, I'm not anti-Jewish at all. I'm anti-Zionist. Oh, that's trifling, he said. But he said that if he let me if I let him guide me, I could re-establish my credibility with the Jewish community. Anyway, it's an offer I politely declined. Now I'm told that the Jewish community offered the Labor Party $3 million to get rid of me at pre-selection.
Uh-huh.
And in all the years I was in Parliament, most years I was just automatically re-endorsed. And then somebody else stood against me with a member of the state government. And I had members of his own union phone me up and say, look, we're not going to wear this. And we said, he's a clown, or these other disparaging comments. We'll support you. And so they did get someone to run against me, but I won easily. So the next thing, of course, was the disendorsement.
Yeah.
So I've no idea whether the Labor Party got its $3 million. I suspect it did. But
why would the Jewish community be critical of you? What were you saying at the time?
I had been fairly critical of the Zionists. I was in Lebanon during the first invasion of Israel, and their behaviour I thought was appalling.
They went into Lebanon, into southern Lebanon, you mean?
Yeah. I wrote a paper on it.
Right.
And that paper was referred to quite often by the Jewish community to prove how anti-Israel I was. Well, I was never anti-Israel. I was anti-Zionist, and I still am.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know where it's going to go, but I think we have to be very, very careful of not being objective about Israel's policies.
Now, Israel is a long way from Australia. We don't have any direct geopolitical interests in the region. We have general interests in the region because this is a source of oil, the Middle East, the Gulf area. We want stability. We want just peace and stability. What was your motivation in criticizing Israel's invasion of Lebanon? Was it a moral issue?
But basically, it was a moral repugnance. I saw truck after truck of Israeli military vehicles loaded to the gunnels with, they say everything but the kitchen sink, but in this case they had kitchen sinks on as well, or trucks going back to Israel. And one of the things that amused me was there was heaps of computers going back. But what they were, they had the fingerboards and the screens, and they thought that was a computer. Of course, the computer was quite separate. So what you had left in Lebanon was a lot of computers, but no screens and no fingerboards. But I think a lot of people I spoke to in Lebanon, they were highly critical of the standard of living in Israel. They said the standard of living in Lebanon was far higher, and I think it was. Yeah,
interesting. Yeah, Israel occupies southern Lebanon. I think a 20-kilometre buffer zone, something like that. But they got out. They ended up withdrawing.
Yeah, but they got out
after a few years.
But they're gone. They controlled basically the whole of Lebanon for a while. And it was during that time when I was there, I see these truckloads of stuff going back to Israel. And
Interesting. why was Keating obsessed with Australia becoming part of Asia and enforcing multiculturalism? What was in his mind?
I think it was basically Bog Irish. It's the Bog Irish element. I think that's all I can put it down to. Common sense that told him that, Australia was not and is not an Asian country. And that doesn't mean we have bad relations with them. In fact, it's probably in our interest to have that position. If we're going to become an Asian country, which Asian country do we become?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm puzzled by Keating because he and I grew up very close to each other. He was in the Liverpool area, Punchbowl area, and I was in the Parramatta Westmead area. So we're both Westies, and I quite, when he's not being bigoted, I quite like to hear him talk. It takes me back to my roots, so to speak. But I don't understand someone like him. His mentor in the Labor Party was the New South Wales leader. What was his name? The state leader, the great Labor populist, Jack Lang.
Lang, yeah.
And he used to go and sit at the feet of Jack Lang, and Jack Lang would give him his wisdom about how to play politics and principles and all that sort. Keating has no resemblance to Jack. Jack Lang was a great patriot, whether one agrees with his policies or not. He was proud to be Australian and proud to be a white Australian, European Australian. So that puzzles me, and it puzzles me a bit with Hawke too. I don't understand Hawke, a man with all the advantages that Australia could give, and here he is promoting Chinese interests in Australia, as Prime Minister. Just odd, don't you think? It's a bit strange.
Well, they have a thing in detective stories. They say follow the money, and I think both Hawke and Keating were in the pay of the Chinese, and I think Keating probably still is. Don't worry about him suing me. I haven't got any money.
Good. I mean, bad. I mean, good and bad. Good and bad.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about Pauline. Good old Pauline. Is that all right?
Oh yeah, that's
Pauline
right.
Hanson. Now I am old enough to have seen on television, on the nightly news, you being interviewed about Pauline Hanson, this rising media sensation. And as I recall, you provided a staffer to go and write her opening speech.
Yeah, I provided staffer to her initially in her opening speech, which in fact was a very good speech, but she stuffed it up by, in the middle of it, she said, quite out of the blue, she just said, I think there's too many Chinese in Australia. Now, that may well be the case, but she shouldn't have put it in the speech like that. And I think the speech was, and I've challenged many, many journalists to tell me what they objected to in her speech, and that's what they always hone in on. But it wasn't in the speech. She ad-libbed that bit.
Ah, right. So you helped her there. You were giving her advice. She was a complete novice at politics, and you were a seasoned by the mid-90s. You were a seasoned parliamentarian.
She found it very difficult in the Labor Party because no one wanted to sit next to her, and the parliamentary officers were pulling their hair out. And I said, look, put her next to me. I've got no problem. And so that's what happened.
Right.
She sat next to me and next to an aisle, so there was only one politician she had to get on with. That was me. And I went out of my way to look after her. I mean, she was just incredibly naive. I did a couple of interviews with her where they'd ask her a question and she completely stuffed it up. So I had to join in and say, Paul and I have discussed this and put it back on track. We had never discussed it, of course, but she got the people that gathered around her, the people could see this was a honeypot. They saw me as unnecessary.
And in the 1998 election, she arranged for a vote against you, in effect, in Kalgoorlie.
Oh, yes. She said to me, what will be the preferences, Graham? I said to her, you run the candidate against me, I've got a good chance of losing this seat. I had a fairly substantial margin. It was about 10%. But I know how vulnerable that was in certain areas in the Pilbara. One major polling booth in the Pilbara, I remember people coming to the polling booth and all her cards were left under a rock. There was no one there. They'd grab hers and they'd find Pauline Hanson and they'd vote down the paper, and of course I was below her on the paper.
Mm.
So, in fact, I was above her, so they went down the paper, back up the top, and so I ended up with her second last preferences. Yeah, she. My main objection to her was and is that she put back the growth of an outward-looking Australian nationalism many years, probably forever, and that was a pity.
Yeah.
Because I think we needed that outward-looking nationalism in Australia, and I still fervently believe that, unlike, international multiculturalism.
Yeah. Well, talking about nationalism and patriotism, we're getting towards the end of this interview. I just wanted to bring up one name you'll be familiar with. It's Dennis McCormack.
Oh, yes, yeah.
And you had a good team around you, which included Dennis in the Parliament during the 1990s, right?
Yeah, that's right. He was on my staff, and he was excellent. He was tremendously good researcher.
Tremendous knowledge base.
And his knowledge base was very wide, and it was a base that included his detailed knowledge of China. He spoke fluent Mandarin, and he worked throughout China. He'd gone to China originally to teach English to the Chinese, who were ravenous for English. But then he branched out and he went all over China. And I found him, and I still do, a very good resource.
Now, one thing you did, and one thing that I haven't heard acknowledged, is that you, by taking the lead and being in Parliament for so long, fighting the good fight, you drew in good people such as Dennis. You drew them in. You drew in talent. You had such a good team. You could lend someone to Pauline to help write her first speech. You had Dennis. I assume Dennis was writing speeches for you sometimes, doing research for you.
Mainly doing research.
Yeah, I think that was. And Dennis has been before and after a great patriot in Australia, and I think you helped give guidance to and direction for those people. So that's important.
Yes, so I think Australia owes a great debt to Dennis McCormack. They'll never ever acknowledge it, but I think they do.
Yeah,
I certainly do.
Yeah, he's made a tremendous effort. Well, Graeme, thank you very much for. We've been on for an hour and a half at least, so it's a great interview.
Time flies.
Time flies when you're having fun. Old memories. Thanks very much for your time, and thanks very much for your championing our people in Australia, and there haven't been many like you, and I think we should be acknowledging people such as yourself.
Well, I'll be very interested to know what sort of feedback you get. I'm that old, I should actually be abandoning all this, but I can't. It's like a drug, and I still think that maybe there's something I've still got left to contribute.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And let's keep in touch. And I know that others have been doing so. So thanks again for a fine interview, and I'll be sending you a copy before too long.
Good. Okay. Thanks a lot.
All the best. Goodbye.